Hey friends, you're listening to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast with Raina Wilson, where wisdom and real life stories inspire and equip women to make the best choices for themselves and their families. In a world where it's easy to always feel like you're falling short, whether your health journey looks different than others or you're juggling a million things, this space is for you. This show is so much more than just wellness information. We're not here to add to the noise. Instead, we're here to equip you with wisdom in the areas you wish you were wiser, so you can find hope and joy as you navigate your unique healing journey. So grab a cup of coffee or turn up the volume over the sound of dishes and kiddos. Let's talk about what it really looks like to care for yourself and for the ones you love with grace, intention, and faith. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. I am so excited to share this week's episode because this is part 2 to one of y'all's all-time favorite interviews, my friend PJ Harlow. PJ is the founder and CEO of PJ Harlow Wellness. She is a certified holistic health practitioner, a virtual holistic mold consultant specialized in working with environmentally sensitive and symptomatic individuals. PJ, as you guys know, integrates her training in functional medicine, environmental science, and building practices with her passion for data analytics into her consulting and coaching principles. And we get the benefit of hearing all of these things in part 2 of this episode. Now, if you haven't heard her first episode in creating a healthy home microbiome, I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes, but that is where you definitely need to start. For this episode, we kind of get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty details of living in mold. What do you do when you can't move? How to be safe and make wise decisions in the remediation process, and all of the other ways that we don't really realize mold exposure, toxicity, and how to find healing outside of the fear in this conversation. Now, I am, like I said, so excited to share this with you, so let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome back, PJ, to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for part 2.
Yeah. Like I said, our community has loved your episodes. I think you've honestly just been a consistent resource over the past 2-3 years that I'm like, have you talked to PJ? I don't know this stuff. Like, here's PJ's Instagram. Here's her website. Please just call PJ. So that's been super fun. But before we get into the nitty gritty of part 2, one, you guys, please go listen to our first episode. That will lay a foundation to this whole conversation, because we're going to not necessarily get into the nuance of molds in terms of what is it? What does it look like? How can you test in your home, as much as what do we do now that we have it kind of conversation. So PJ, what does life look like for you right now? And what's a simple joy that you're really loving?
Right now, I am really kind of digging in and trying to really refocus myself. So we were just talking about this. One of my weak points is I struggle with focus sometimes. And I have so many things that I want to teach and get out that I'm really just trying to really organize myself, but also give myself some grace, because I'm very, very hard on myself, and, just trying to balance. I think that's something I talk about all the time with my students and my clients. So I'm really just trying to do that. And I think that, and what was the other question?
What is a simple joy you're loving right now? It's the little things that's keeping you going.
Spending time with my kids and just watching them in this season of their life. All of my kids are adults. My youngest son is 19, and just kind of watching their young lives unfold. I think that is just, I have recently, and I'll make this short, my mom had open heart surgery, and it was a very kind of jarring moment in the timeline of life where I kind of really realized, like, whoa, my mom is now my grandmother, I am now my mom, and my kids are now me. And it was just very, very visible at that moment. So I think I'm really just enjoying family and kind of like intentionally making space for that, like planning some vacations. We've never really done vacations in my life because I never could afford it until I owned my own business. So we're just really focusing on spending some more QT.
Yeah. No, I remember you talking about that, and I remember reading that post or story that you had, and I was like, oh, yes. And I think it's more prevalent when you see your parents ailing. My dad was in a car accident when I was in high school, and so that was the moment for us that it went from like, oh, my Superman is at all my games to doing all the things to, oh, he's like chronically on the couch probably for the next, for as long as I could remember. Things are a little bit different now, and his health is by far improved. But I remember it took me back to that moment of thinking, yes, like our health is so life is but a vapor. Mm-hmm. And even just seeing friends right now currently walk through just some health crisis with their infants, being like, well, Lord, like, okay, like I have to trust you because I'm going to literally spiral myself, thinking about what does tomorrow look like.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that she's recovering as well as she can. And I'm glad that you're getting that quality time. That's something that our family has actually prioritized as well. It's like, you know what? We may not have all the money in the bank, but I'd rather go on vacation and make memories than have like X amount of money in the bank. Right?
Exactly.
So that's been really convicting for us because my dad was like, I'd rather go to Disney World with you guys and spend X amount of money than not, and then what, after I pass, I just give you a chunk of cash that you wish you had done all these things with me. So
totally,
I can totally empathize with that.
Yeah. You got to plan it. That's, I feel like we're getting it on the calendar, and, we'll figure out a way to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I love that. Well, kind of pivoting into the emotional component of this conversation because it's an emotional one. Like, you were the one that I called in tears and was like, PJ, what do I do? And we touched on this very briefly in the last episode, but I think it would be a great foundation to, as we move forward in this conversation. How do we navigate fear? Whether it's the initial fear, the post-mold fear, and how do we make this not, kind of like we talked about, the end-all be-all nervous system state for the rest of our lives?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is, first and foremost, giving yourself a break and understanding that this topic is inherently scary, you know? And when you really start learning about it in more detail, it kind of gets scarier. It's like the natural default, right? And I've spent a considerable amount of time in the past few years trying to figure out how to best teach people about risk. Yeah. And one of the things that I really noted when I was kind of breaking it down, like, what is the obstacle? What is kind of like the thing in people's way when they first start learning about risk? And one of the things that I noted was that this absolute kind of black and white binary thinking. And what do I mean by that? I was talking about fireplaces once on Instagram, and I commonly talk about it with my clients because a lot of people have fireplaces in their homes, and they can be risky for a couple different reasons. One, chimneys frequently leak. They usually have very poor flashing. They're not maintained. They're not, serviced often enough. And any type of roof penetration, any hole in your roof, no matter what it is going to be one more risk, right? Yeah. We can call those yellow flags just because of what they are, right? So you kind of have to take note of those things and take more care because they have the bigger potential to leak in the future. Now, when I was talking about this kind of black and white thinking, when people are first learning about these topics, they can be scary, right? It can be like, oh my gosh, PJ was talking about fireplaces, so this means that I can never have a fireplace in my home.
Right.
And we automatically go to that like default of
Yep.
it's either, you know, it's either bad or good. And I think that one of the real important things is to remember that there is a spectrum. And, you know, it's not even just good, better, best, right? Or, you know, terrible or really bad. You know, there's so many nuances and context that goes into gauging risk, you know, when we're talking about mold. And I think that is something that is taught, right? You have to learn how to be able to look at your own personal health and then also look at the circumstances and be able to add all that context into gauging a risk. I actually even, and I'm not doing a plug, I'm just saying, you know, because this is so difficult to just, it's not something you can learn on Instagram in a 30-second reel. It's not even something I could possibly teach, you know, in that format. So I actually created a whole guide. It's called Home Check, and it really teaches people how to kind of be able to take all of this in. And additionally, you kind of mentioned nervous system, right? The nervous system. I find that people sometimes even often feel like they're doing something wrong if they're like learning about this information, because they're like, ooh, I don't want to learn about that because that's going to trigger my nervous system dysregulation. And so, but it's almost like you lean too far onto the other side, right? And this is where we really talk about balance, because, you know, you can't be in the good vibes only club.
Yep.
Right. That, you know, the place where, you know, everything's just about hope and just, you know, think good thoughts and things won't happen. I mean, I'm all about positivity. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
you have to have an awareness.
Exactly. And fear, as scary as it is a part of life. If we
and
didn't,
healthy.
Yes. If we didn't have fear, we wouldn't have survived as a species, right? If you think about it, like, you can't just like, I'm going to walk in the middle of the street and I'm going to think good thoughts that a car isn't going to run me over.
Exactly.
That doesn't work, right? You have to analyze the risk of, are any cars coming? You know, these are very basic things that we learn as children, but we don't really think about them as we become adults. So I think looking at mold from a risk perspective and understanding that this is a skill set that you need to learn about and then master over time, I think that is very helpful for people. Another thing I think is just being aware that, you know, that this is a scary topic, you know, and that it's natural that you're gonna want to be kind of almost propelled to rush. You know, that's another big obstacle, mistake, if you want. I don't like to say mistake, but it's kind of like a thing that I see people do very frequently. They're like, oh my gosh, I found out I have mold.
Yeah.
And I just want to hire the first person that I see.
Right.
That, you know, sounds good to me. And this is another reason mistakes and issues start happening, is because you have to pump the brakes, slow down. The way that we have been able to successfully guide people through inspection, remediation, decontamination so successfully is because we strategize. And every single step that we go through, every phase of the project is very specific, and we have very set goals, expectations, and that's how we end up executing and being able to do this properly. And it is possible to go through this without it being like a tragedy, right? I can't say that, you will not have any
Sure.
stress at all, because just inherently it's not the greatest topic. Like,
Right.
nobody really wants this to happen to them. But I think that when you're working with a good team and you have a good team behind you, then it takes a lot of that weight off, and you're not guessing, you're not presuming, you're not
Mm-hmm.
wondering, am I doing this right? Is this the right thing to do? I think they know what they're
Right.
talking about. You have confidence, you have clarity, you have assurance. These are all words that you have when you have that team. So,
Mm-hmm.
those are a few ways that I recommend just really getting yourself into a place where, like I said, it's not going to be no stress whatsoever, but at least you can work through it with your team so it's not so scary.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I can't tell you how many people I have worked with where we get on a call, and at the beginning of the call, they're at level 100. And
Mm-hmm.
by the end of the call, they're like, thank you. That
Yep.
is all I needed,
Yeah.
was just a little bit of reassurance that this was right, and that, we're walking through this properly. And there's always a workaround. There
Mm-hmm.
really, truly is. And the last thing I'll say about this, too, is that, remember, most of the time, I don't want to say always, I don't really like using absolute language, but most of the time, this doesn't happen to people overnight, right?
Yeah.
It's like smoking cigarettes, right? Somebody usually doesn't get cancer because they took a drag from one cigarette. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not how it works. It's usually a period of time. I'm not saying to go on the other side of that and say, "Oh, forget
Sure.
about it. We got years. Don't,
I've got
don't,
time.
I've got time." But, try to, like, just talk yourself through that initial panic, and it's okay to go through those feelings. But I think that if you work with a team instead of trying to, like, that's the other part of this that I see, is that we're so used to, as women, kind of feeling like, okay, I need to take the wheel. I need to take this all upon
Mm-hmm.
myself, and I need to solve it. I need to
Yep.
start researching. I'm on Instagram, I'm in the Facebook groups, and you kind of, like, let this dominate your life in a way, instead of learning to delegate,
Yeah.
and to kind of understanding that, hey, I don't have to become an expert to be able to walk through this. There are people out there that I can delegate this, and then be able to kind of put this energy that I have into things that are really going to matter for your
Mm-hmm.
kids, for your family, and so you can get through it with the least stress possible.
Oh, for sure. We are not experts by any means, but PJ was the person that we called to be able to walk us through two different mold remediations and then walking through our deco process. And I honestly, we couldn't have done it without you. But one of the things that you touched on in our previous episode was like the tree analogy, and we can kind of walk through the progression loosely of like, I think I have mold in my house, but again, we're a military community, so this is super nuanced for us because we don't have a lot of say in where we live. And like PJ said, this duty station in particular, we assessed our risk. We were shown three different houses. Joseph and I walked into the first house that we were shown. It smelled funny, and Joseph and I looked at each other and were like, "No."
Yeah, no.
You know, and that was something we learned through PJ because we walked through some of these things. We walked through the house, checked the HVAC, and we're like, no. Does it mean that our current house is mold free? Probably not. Just because of the money that the Army puts towards their housing for their soldiers. But I'm super thankful for the skill set that you talk about of assessing risk. That being said, one of the major things that I've had conversations with people is the Army or whoever came in to do my environmental test. And they said, what, as long as the inside microbiome mold is equal to the mold outside, you're fine. So you touched on the tree analogy. If you can kind of unpack that a little more, and just paint that picture for us.
So you mentioned a couple things. I think to just like rewind it,
Yeah.
We're not looking for a perfect home, right?
Right.
And this is another thing that is kind of like foundational, right?
Mm-hmm.
The objective is not to find and there isn't, you're not going to be like,
home.
Okay, there's going to be this home that doesn't have a fireplace and doesn't have a dishwasher and doesn't have this and doesn't have a crawl space and doesn't, that's not the way to do it. You kind of have to look at every home like it's its own entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at all the considerations, your health, your climate, what risky things that this home has, but what
mm-hmm.
good attributes does it
mm-hmm.
have? And when we talk about the internal microbiome, that part often gets very misunderstood. And when we're talking about this today, right now, it's important for you to understand that a lot of the topics that we're discussing are advanced.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're kind of going to your local mold inspector and you start throwing out terminology like the home microbiome, they're not going to know what you mean. If they happen to, they're going to get defensive. They're going to make something up. No professional wants to look stupid.
Exactly.
They don't.
Yeah.
They also, that's another thing that I try to kind of tell people, like, don't waste your time trying to convince a professional about something that you heard on a podcast or you read or something like that. If you find yourself in that situation, try your best to find somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't like to say it's right or wrong, but more so that's not the person for you.
Yeah.
Right? There's somebody else out there. They might not have to have all the exact belief systems that you do, but at least if they're open-minded and respect your philosophy and your viewpoint, then that's a better kind of match in that situation. But when we talk about the internal microbiome, there's going to be background molds in every home. Think about it. When we think about mold is a byproduct of moisture. So anywhere where there's water, your shower, your bathtub, your sink, your dishwasher, behind your refrigerator, behind your washing machine, all those areas are going to have elevated fungal ecologies versus like the middle of your living room or, in your bedroom, right? And so we're able and capable of being exposed to this microbiome that's full of fungi, bacteria, parasites, protozoa, yeast, and we're actually supposed to be exposed to both good and bad microbes because that's what trains our immune systems and, even children. Back in the day, they used to have chickenpox parties and things like that because they want you to be exposed because, sometimes we're supposed to get sick. That's your body actually learning. in that period. So that is something I always try to instill and help people remember. Now, when it comes to like remediation, and, the IICRC has guidelines, and the objective is always in the book. It says that the objective of remediation is to return the home to a normal fungal ecology. Part of the problem is that what is a normal fungal ecology, right? It's going to look different in every home. Just like you were saying, most traditional inspectors, they're going to say a normal fungal ecology looks like when your air is the same as it is outside, inside.
Yeah.
I don't believe that at all, per se. I don't really think, I don't really think currently that we have just like one test that is going to be able to verify that. That's the other part that makes it so difficult, is that whenever we're doing these types of investigations, it's like a puzzle, right? Yeah. And you're kind of putting all these pieces together to try to build a case profile and kind of understand what's happening. But I think that when we remember that we're not pushing for sterility, and I've been talking about
Mm-hmm.
um, this a lot, like on my Instagram and even in a couple other interviews, that, you know, when you think about what a healthy home means to you, that's something that everybody should really work on. What does that mean to you? Because it will help you in your purchases of products that
Mm.
are sold to make homes healthy. Air filters, for instance. You know, do you just want a home with a healthy, diverse microbiome? Or does healthy mean sterility to
Right.
you? I'm not saying one's bad or one's good. I mean, personally, I want a nice, diverse microbiome in my house, you know? Sometimes I have to use disinfectants like around my toilet and, you know,
Yeah.
places that are going to have a, you know, higher kind of, you know, bacterial content that need to be cleaned and disinfected. But I'm not like spraying these products all around my house all the time, like we're taught in kind of the traditional
Yes.
world, that germs
Right.
are bad and that you have to
Yeah.
kill them all.
Mm-hmm.
So really, I think it's important to break that down and kind of understand, what does healthy mean to you? Because everybody has a differing opinion. And I also think that knowing that will help you too when you're building your team,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, you're likely not going to find a remediation company and an inspector that are going to have the same exact beliefs as you. And when you really understand that and you know that, like, okay, our definitions aren't the same,
Yeah.
then you can kind of go through this process a little easier, because you're not just like putting your health in the hands of some guy that doesn't know anything about your health, you
Right.
know?
Mm-hmm. Spot on. Yeah, PJ, I think what blew my mind was when you were talking about the tree and like how, like you said, there's so much more to this conversation. So like if you're coming in to this episode, we've laid relative a foundation to this topic in the previous one, but there's so much to unpack, and it was helpful for me to understand, like, we could run all of the testing. We could run the testing that your environmental team is going to come in. You know, we did the ERMI. That was what made sense for our family, for what we valued, our risk assessment. But at the same time, it was understanding that mold gives off mycotoxins. You know, like these were conversations that we had for the first time between you and my husband of like, wait a minute, like, look at all these components to a tree. Mold
Mm-hmm.
is not just this pink stuff on the side of the toilet, right? It's the mycotoxins, it's the leaves, it's the stem. Do you have acorns, quote, in your home? You
Yeah.
know? So if you could
And
unpack that a little more, it was so helpful.
sure, sure. So I always like to teach in the most simplistic way that I possibly can. And that's why we're using these analogies of a
Mm-hmm.
tree. And so when you think about mold, growing, you can kind of think about it like a tree, right? A tree has roots, it's got branches and bark and leaves and acorns. And a mold colony will grow very similarly, but on a very microscopic level that we usually don't see until it's well formed. But a colony will have mycelium, which is a root structure, and that is usually what digs into whatever surface the mold is growing on. And it will also grow hyphae, which are kind of like the branches, and the spores are like acorns. As mold is growing, just like a tree does, it's a pretty messy process,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like a growth of a tree. If you walk into a forest and you look at the floor of the forest, you
Mm-hmm.
see remnants of growth everywhere.
Yeah.
Branches, bark, twigs, kindling, acorns, monkey balls, all these little things.
Yeah.
And so a colony will shed as well. It's just we don't really tap into this because this is in the micro world and we're in the macro world. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of this is invisible. You can't see a spore floating around. And, again, we can be exposed to some level of spores. You are as soon as you open your window,
Yeah.
right? There are tons and tons of molds outside in the soil, but when we're in our homes, it's different, right? And it's different when we have molds that are growing in our walls and growing on the materials that our homes are built out of. And these usually bring species that are more pathogenic, that create more dangerous
Right.
mycotoxins. To just touch on mycotoxins quickly to kind of just refresh and
Yeah.
bring anybody new who's listening. So mycotoxins are a byproduct of mold. They are a secondary metabolite, and they're not necessarily primary, and they're not necessary for the mold's growth, but they are I kind of compare it to snake venom, right? Because that really helps people kind of get an idea of how it's used. And primarily, molds can just create mycotoxins, and it will almost like reside throughout the colony. It can be in the roots. It can just kind of like if you think of like our circulatory system, right? It isn't exact, but I'm trying to make analogies so you can kind of get a visual. Mycotoxins, they can be in the spores, they can be in the hyphae, they can be in the mycelium, all throughout the colony. So if you have a colony that, let's say, grew in a wall during the summer and it lost its water source, so it dried out and you were never able to locate it. It was hidden, which is very frequently happens. And that colony dries out and it starts to break apart. Like think of an old flower arrangement that gets brittle and it starts to break and little pieces start to break off. And every time your HVAC system kicks on, it changes the pressure in the house. I'm sure you guys have had a situation in your home where like it's windy or somebody opens the front door and it makes another door slam or it makes papers blow off the table or something. There's airflow all throughout your house all the time. We just don't see it, right? So if you had this situation, these little fragments will break off of the colony and they can spread all throughout your house. Similarly, when the colony is living and it's growing, it will kind of produce these fragments as well. Just like when we were talking about the forest, it will also release and produce spores. The spores are the acorns. These are kind of like, the dandelion where the little seeds get released. When mold gets stressed, it will resporulate because it's a kind of like a defense mechanism, but also a mechanism to keep the species going, right? If I think that I'm a mold colony and I'm potentially going to die or I'm in danger, I'm going to release all my children, right? Go create somewhere else, right? And so what happens then is that there can be mycotoxins in those spores. And potentially this is one of the bigger reasons why we don't kill mold and why we don't treat it like bacteria, because it has the capacity
to get angry,
to get upset and stressed. And so you always want to think about that when you've got some type of product in your hand. Could this potentially stress mold out? You see all these products that people are, selling on Instagram, and I'm not going to name any brands. I'm not trying to get sued, but I'm just saying that there is no product that is going to, solve the problem of mold. I'll give you the answer right now. So, because that's usually, well, what do we use then?
Right.
Dish soap. It is that easy. Just dish soap and water. We want to remove, we don't want to put no vinegar, no peroxide, no essential oils, no chlorine dioxide, no force of nature, no hypochlorous acid, no chlorine dioxide, no ammonia, no quats, no bleach.
Don't bleach your mold.
It doesn't matter. No ozone. Like you could insert like all those products I just mentioned. The thing that they have in common is that they are disinfectants,
Right.
antimicrobials. They're in a category. Some of them, I mean, like vinegar, that's a little bit different. Borax,
Yeah.
they're different in the way that they're changing the actual pH of the surface, and that's why they have some inhibiting properties. But we don't want to use those either. We don't
Mm-hmm.
want to stress mold out.
Yeah.
We want to be very kind of almost,
Respectful. I remember you.
gentle. Yeah,
Yeah.
respectful and gentle with
Yeah.
the approach. I always also like to, another analogy I like to think of is like, think of it if it were lead or asbestos. Would you try to kill asbestos? Never. No, you'd be like, we have to remove it, right? So
Right.
a detergent, a soap is the key. It's in your house already. You don't have to spend $35 on a bottle of spray. Like, I mean, if
Yeah.
you want to buy that, you can,
Sure.
but it's not really
We
doing
love our
anything.
Dawn. Yeah. It works. Yeah, that is super helpful, PJ. I think one of the common questions, we touched on it a little bit before we started recording, was, okay, we're here. We've recognized some of the symptoms. We may have found places in our home. We've linked up with you for further testing, confirmation. But what do we do if we can't move? You and I have had that conversation for our family personally of like, we're doing the best that we can. What are some of those first steps that you would say, it's all right, analyze your risk. What are the little things that we can do proactively when we don't have the choice to evacuate, if it's that kind of situation?
Sure. And I think that it's important to recognize, like, and you will likely need a professional to help you gauge the severity.
For sure.
Because there are situations that people can't make a move, and we've been like, okay, well, I think you'll be okay for another 9 months.
Sure.
Let's reassess in 9 months and kind of go from there, because things change. Not everything is going to stay stagnant and the same. So try to look at it like, this is temporary.
Yeah.
This is a better way to, because when you're going through this, everything can seem so like permanent and so intense and so panic inducing that it literally feels like the end of the world. And I know this because I've been through
You've done it. Yeah.
I've had multiple nervous breakdowns, like, for real. I'm not just like saying that.
Yeah.
And when you're sick or one of your children are sick and you're put in a position where you're like, this is literally devastating to go through. There's so much loss when it comes with this. But just remember, this is temporary. It is not always going to be like this. And if you can't move, if you really can't go anywhere, there are things that you can do to lower your risk. First and foremost, do not take it upon yourself to start DIYing things. This is where you get in trouble. And let me just touch on this a little bit more, because I'm seeing an influx of DIY type stuff happening. I'm seeing it on TikTok. I'm seeing it in Instagram. I'm even hearing it in client sessions. Oh, well, my husband thought that he could set up plastic and he could, take it out, and then he did, and then now we're sicker. And so one of the things that I like to talk about with remediation, and I'll come back around to this, remind me if I don't, is that it's not just like, I'm going to tape up some plastic and that's going to protect me, right? Think of it like, if you were to go to Chernobyl, you know what Chernobyl is, right? If you were to go to Chernobyl and I just taped some plastic up in a room, would you really feel safe if I was like, yeah, I put some plastic up, go spend the night in there? Like, no way. You would be like, you're crazy. I'm not going to do it. But this is oftentimes, even what some remediation companies do, they're not measuring the negative pressure in the room. And so remediation takes hands-on training.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that I can teach you online. it really this is why when the IICRC teaches how to become a remediation technician, their certification course is in person. They
Yeah.
won't even allow you to do that course online because it requires hands-on building a containment, learning how to use a manometer and how to hold that negative pressure. Because when you start digging into a wall,
Yep.
how they build it is they'll build a containment and someone will be on the outside measuring with this machine called a manometer. They'll be measuring the kind of volume of air in the room, and they're holding it so it's not backdrafting up into your walls or into your other floor systems. And when someone starts digging into a wall, that calculation changes immediately. Okay. So the volume of the room just changed because you're making the wall bigger, right? So it's going to change the pressure. So somebody has to be outside of the containment being able to control that and making sure that that contamination is going out a window and through an air filtration device. I have a colleague of mine who has a machine called an Instascope, and it's like a really expensive mold test on wheels, and it has like a wand that looks kind of like a golf club that you can kind of carry around. And it will tell you on the machine like what if it's mold and how much it is. And he was like playing around with it the first time he got it, and he kind of went up to a colony and it shot up to like 1,000 something. And then he took a piece of toilet paper and just brushed it against it, and it shot up into the hundreds of millions. And this isn't anything you can see with your naked eye. So imagine what happens if, you know, I give it to husbands, you know, even couples, you know, I see lots of couples who love to like be hands-on and do things themselves. And there are things you can do, but just not that part, right? That part really needs to be done by a professional. Okay. So that's what I would say about that part, so that it could potentially make your home much, much, much worse really quickly. And we don't want to be pushing this contamination
everywhere else
into spaces that we'll never be able to reach without like gutting half your house, right? So that's what I would say about that. You can get air purifiers, you know, to help. What I would say is if you know where some of the moldy areas are, I would kind of like move away from those areas if you can. And if that means making one bedroom your kind of sanctuary, then I would do that. Even if you need to bring the kids in the bedroom and, you know, put a mattress on the floor and make it a camp or something, do that. I promise you kids will love it. Anyway, they'll think it's awesome. Make a fort or something. So I would do that and just kind of try to make one room the safest in the house, right? I would also try to, whatever room that is, do what we call kind of manual ventilation. Open a window on one side of the room, open another one on another side of the room. It's winter where I live. It's like literally like 10 degrees out. So I know it's cold, but just do it for like 15 minutes in the morning or something. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. The objective is to allow new air to come in and that old air to exit. So it's almost like you're doing an air exchange, right? You're recycling and getting a fresh new air that comes in. And you can use a purifier. I would also probably clean off the knickknacks and put them away. You know, just dust them off, box them up, put them away for a while. Just because the less like stuff you have everywhere, the less dust is going to collect. And in that dust is where a lot of these fragments and spores, that's where they collect a lot. So it doesn't mean that you have to deep clean every single day. I would probably do a deep clean of whatever space is going to be the biggest space that you spend time in. Clean those baseboards. Just use like Branch Basics or just soap and water. Don't need to use any disinfectants. We don't need to kill. And that's important too, because I hear people saying, oh, well, let me buy this fogger. I heard that I can use this, stuff to fog. There's a lot of controversy around fogging. Fogging was kind of like hijacked by a lot of companies when COVID happened. And a lot of, this was a practice that was being done to kind of like fog disinfectants to kill COVID. And so now there's all these companies that are doing the same thing for mold, right?
Yeah.
So what you're fogging really is potentially the issue. Fogging was originally meant to bring particulate matter down to surfaces for wiping.
Yeah.
But it turned into killing mold, or this is going to prevent mold from growing again. But as we talked about earlier, we don't want to stress mold out. Okay. Even if these products are marketed as non-toxic for humans, that doesn't mean that they are potentially non-toxic to fungi or that it's not going to stress mold out. Yeah. So that's kind of the thing. And it is a very temporary fix that could potentially have further consequences to that. We just don't know, right? Do not ozone. I have seen ozone destroy homes. I have seen people ozone and they'll leave and then they'll ozone and then come back. And that, again, could stress mold out. So we don't want to do that either. None of those, you'll hear people on Facebook say they do it and they'll say they're fine. But there's a lot of chemical reactions that can happen from ozone. And fogging, again, you don't know the exact kind of microbiological, contents that are in your home. You don't know what the mixture is. You don't know what the chemical makeup is. And oxidizing, that in chemistry can create byproducts, right? And we don't want to do that. So I would say try to stay away from those things, and I would take more gentle approaches like filtration, cleaning, going outside, spending a significant time outside, and just trying to not stress yourself out, and not talk about it obsessively, even though it's there. And I know you're likely worried about it. I would kind of intentionally take time, especially in your relationship, and say like, okay, when we go on walks, this is when we're going to talk about this topic, but every other time we're not going to talk about it. Like set time where you're like, okay, this is where I can get out everything I need to say. And then don't talk about it, about the kids. Because I've also seen this where, people are very open in their families, and I can appreciate that, but you can almost create a kind of like obsessive compulsive anxiety and nervous system dysregulation in your child, where they become panicked about mold. And granted, I get it. If your kids are like middle school, even teenagers, it's not like you can hide this from them. And I'm not saying that at all. But, the deep discussions and kind of like, you need to kind of put on a strong face for your kids and show them that everything's going to be okay. So I would kind of say, talk about that with your spouse, but, try to be as least more positive with your kids. I even made that mistake, so I'm not shaming anybody. It's hard when you're going through this and you're, it's just, you don't know what you don't know. Right.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I think it was super helpful just to create boundaries around that conversation, even while working with you. It was like, we're going to take this one step at a time, but it cannot be our whole life. Even post mold loss, Joseph and I moving into our next duty station, I wouldn't say that we had like PTSD, but there was a lot of post-traumatic stress walking into a new military home, and we we had to assess the risks. We made the best choice that we could. We did all the little things, like we did all the little things, which I laugh because when we moved, we started over. That's just a part of our mold story. But we had friends that were like, "We love how minimalist you are," when they came over to see our new house, and I'm like, "Yeah," because we kind of lost everything, but also like now that I know, I don't want to clean everything, so that's actually been really helpful for us personally to walk that out. Is I would love to decorate all these things you see on Instagram and these well done up homes, but I'm also through my lens thinking, do you know how often I would have to dust that? Do you know, I don't want to clean these 17 knickknack cute thrift finds
Hmm.
because we've done that, we've been through it. So we live a lot more minimalist just because of some of those things that we walk through because mold lives in the dust and I don't want to, selfishly, I don't want to
Yeah,
clean that.
absolutely. I think even in my own house, we went through mold in 2016, and we still have not gotten a new couch. I live in a rental
Hmm.
and it has a couch, so it's almost funny to me. There's I was even saying it at Christmas because I just don't have all the things that I'd like to have at this
Right.
point.
Yeah.
And, it's the couch that my landlord picked out is huge and like such a pain in the butt. We'd have to move it. And it's
Hmm.
like, so I just say, forget it. But, um, you kind of start looking at things in a different way,
Hmm.
once you kind of go through this. And that's even a balance of
Yep.
not letting yourself get to like a point where you're so fearful that this could potentially happen again, which
Yep.
happens.
Yeah.
I have many clients that even continue to work with us through that trauma
Hmm.
because they are, maybe they didn't work with us through the whole from start to finish.
Right.
And oftentimes people do things that they might regret. And just thinking like that fear is real of thinking
Hmm.
like, I don't want this to happen again. So I'm just not going to buy anything because I'm going to have to
I'm gonna
throw it
throw it
away
away.
again. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that loss is really, it can produce what's called mold PTSD in people because you're so traumatized from the experience that it's natural to feel these feelings. And that's something that you need to literally work through.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, we literally, my husband and I had that conversation last week. We went into an antique store and he found some like really cool coffee table books, right? But in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, that was one of, books are like the most porous. Like I'm running through like the
Mhm.
checklist in the back of my head and I'm like, okay, Raina, getting these really cool 1950s gun books for my husband to put on his bookshelf is not going to kill us.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
work through those little things. But I think that would be a really good transition to some of the things we don't think about. Maybe if we're not even exposed to this conversation, I would have never thought about my dishwasher. I would never have thought about cleaning my washing machine. What are the other areas, bathrooms, that we need to be wary or cognizant of to keep a healthy microbiome?
Your HVAC.
Yeah.
Your HVAC, your HVAC, your HVAC, your HVAC. And I know everybody just fell asleep there when I started
Yeah.
talking about HVAC. It's like people hear HVAC and they're like, I'm sorry,
Well,
my phone's ringing.
yep.
It's really boring and it's just even boring to like look at, right? But where is your HVAC? Where
Hmm.
is your air handler? Your HVAC is not the thing that's outside.
Right.
That's your condenser. You have an internal component. I think understanding where all these things are in your house and how your house works is really critical to being able to understand how to maintain it properly and how to continue, supporting a healthy home microbiome. Um, I even, again, HVAC is a very complicated topic that requires a lot of context,
Yeah.
right? Even when people start asking me, PJ, should I clean my ducts? There's so many like, well,
right. Or
we
they want
got,
to come fog my ducks.
yeah, we got to first understand, like, have you maintained them? How old are they? When's the last time you had somebody assess them? And the traditional, like, oh, well, I have my HVAC maintained. Somebody comes every year. Okay, but what do they do?
They do.
Right? That's important too, because sometimes they might just look at your thermostat and, maybe check the condenser, make sure it's clean outside, and that's it. Are they actually opening up your air handler? And oftentimes too, HVAC guys are HVAC guys. They're not
Right.
mold guys.
Right.
And so they see mold every day. And for them, it's normal. So your system may have mold in it and they might not say a word because they see that in every system. So it's not abnormal or unorthodox for them, right? And again, they don't know what healthy means to you.
Yeah.
And that's, again, an important aspect. I think that understanding how to maintain your home and what professionals need to come and when and what needs to be done is a really important about kind of starting from fresh. And, if you're at a point where you're listening to this podcast and you're like, wow, this is really interesting. I don't want to become an HVAC expert, but I do want to take care of my home. I do want a healthy home, and this really resonates with you. Then the very first step is kind of building your team out and, saying, okay, I do need to hire an HVAC technician, but I really don't know a lot. I created an entire guide. It's called the Pretty Little Guide to HVAC. It is not boring. It's actually, I've been told it's kind of funny.
I love that.
And, I try to make this topic, it's actually really built for women. That's why it's called the Pretty Little Guide to HVAC, because I feel like everything out there was always designed for men and it's just very manly. And I wanted something a little bit more feminine and kind of speaks to women. So there's a lot of analogies that mothers and women will understand. And so, but it tells you everything that you'd possibly need, whether you're, a person who just bought their home, if you're potentially buying a home, if you're a renter, if you've owned your home for 5 years, it tells you where to start and every single thing down to like interview templates and, if you're calling an HVAC tech, what you need to request, how often. We have a whole huge section on ductwork, UV, should you do it or not? What are the pros and cons? Should you clean your ducts? What type of situations? What if they do have mold? What do you do? All of that stuff is written in there. I wish I could sum it up into like a cute little package and provide it. But again, that context comes into play, and there isn't always just one right answer. It really depends on your personalized situation. But that would be one thing I would say is really crucial, is kind of setting all of that up foundationally. Once you kind of set that foundation, cleaning is a part of it. But, sometimes I think I get messages from people and they're like, do you just clean like all day? Like, and I'm like, no, I actually don't. It seems like that on Instagram because I'm always putting out cleaning videos, but I promise I am not cleaning all day. Like it's not, I'm not that, I don't have that much time.
Serious, yeah.
But I think that how you clean and what you clean with matters. I think that really being very cautious and strategic about your use of disinfectants and understanding the difference between a cleaner and a disinfectant. You'd be surprised how many people don't even like from a very foundational, fundamental, basis. Let me spit it out. They don't truly understand what that means because the cleaning industry has confused everybody to thinking that cleaners are disinfectants and disinfectants are cleaners, and they've combined all these products. But for more microbiome friendly cleaning, you want to separate, and everything is layers, right? Whenever you're cleaning, you want to kind of HEPA vac first, then come in with your cleaner. And you can you don't have to deep clean all the time. You can maintain, wipe off your counters, things like that. But you don't, even though I like cleaning, it's cathartic
Same.
for me.
Yeah.
And, I see all the TikTok products and stuff, and sometimes they look really fun, and I'm like jealous because I'm like, man, they get all the fun, foamy, colorful.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The foam in the toilet. I mean, that would, yeah.
I see these ASMR videos and they're putting ice in the toilet and, but obviously that's a total waste of product. And please don't ever dump water on your floor like some of these people do. That is crazy. I have heart palpitations when I see that. But there is a number of products that you can use. I think, again, understanding there's a spectrum, right? Primarily, I use pretty much non-toxic stuff, the basics. Dish soap and water. I have Force of Nature, Branch Basics. Most of you should already know those brands pretty well. They're pretty well established in this community. But sometimes I will, go off base a little bit, and I might use, that pink stuff. It's not truly, yes, it has a fragrance in it, but ultimately it's not nearly as bad as some of the other stuff, again,
pull out your Clorox wipes.
Yeah. Recognizing that there's different grades, but really, I think truly, just being really cognizant that, a home is a living system, and it has a mixture of physics, chemistry, and microbiology all the time. And, you don't have to be a building science expert to understand your home, but just knowing that it's not just this aesthetic, thing that, we don't have any homeowners classes. We didn't in high school. It's not okay, I'm going to algebra. Cool. I'm going to homeowner 101.
Right. How to take care of my home. Yeah.
We don't get any lessons on that, but really we should.
Yeah.
There's, even sometimes, people will come to me and they're like, "Oh, do you teach how to build homes?" And I don't. I'm not a construction consultant. And I'm like, but I did create a whole course on being a more modern homeowner. That's what Home Check, my guides are for. And that's really what that is. It's that kind of high school level, foundational, everything you should really know to be a more modern, health-focused homeowner. And then, you will be prepared if someday you do want to build a home. You will have that fundamental, understanding. It's kind of you would never just go to Spanish 5.
Right.
You need that Spanish 1 and 2 in order to get to that level. And, building a home that is potentially low mold or prevention of, moisture that is mitigated, which is really what you want.
Right.
I would never want a mold-free home. Right. I would want a home that focuses on preventing moisture and that is carefully constructed to have really stellar indoor air. I think that's my biggest takeaway always, is to remember that we're not trying to prevent or kill mold. When you focus on that, that's when you get into trouble. That's when you get into people giving you products that are built to kill mold, products that change the pHs of surfaces, products that cover mold. But when you focus on moisture instead, it's like root cause medicine, right? You're not putting a Band-Aid on anything. That's when you're really focusing on the root cause. So I think it aligns very well with functional medicine philosophy and, that whole kind of holistic sector.
Oh, absolutely. Well, PJ, I have a couple more listener questions before we close out, but I think you kind of touched on a handful of these already. One of them was how to find a new house without mold, which would be, I guess, low mold, and what to look for when house shopping. But I think you said home check would be a great place to start.
It was actually, that is where like the genesis of home check was built, because I had so many clients of mine who were coming to me and saying, how do I find a healthy home? Like, what do I do? And originally, I created like a checklist. That was what I first did. And I was like, here's a 1-page checklist. Here you go. Here's, go through the house and check. And then that wasn't enough. And everybody was coming back to me and saying, okay, the checklist was cool, but like we need more, right? So I made a blueprint. Okay. It was called the Healthy Home Blueprint. And it kind of just had like everything about homes that are risky, that, here's the fireplace, right? The chimney, that type of stuff. And it worked, but to some degree, I always ask for feedback. How can I make things better, right? And everybody was coming back to me and they were like, okay, this is good, but I still don't know, like, how to apply me in there, right? The context part was missing from that. And so that was so inherently important. And nobody is teaching this. Like, nobody's teaching anyone how to gauge risk, how to apply their own personal health context, how to even know, like, even, when we talk about our own health, lots of people throw around these terms like, oh, I have mold illness, I'm hypersensitive. You even have companies that say that they work with hypersensitive individuals. But what does that mean? What's the difference between hypersensitive and sensitive? What's the difference between somebody who's sensitive, but does that mean they have mold illness? Does that mean they have SIRS? Like, what's the difference between all these? And I think these terms are thrown around so loosely. So I took all of that and wrote multiple different guides. One of them being, it's called Risk Profiling and Home Health Intelligence. And it's really about understanding your own health and how to really gauge, am I a sensitive individual? Am I susceptible? What illnesses do I have? I'm symptomatic. Am I hypersensitive? And really breaking down the definitions of those and being able to understand where you fall in that spectrum, because that matters. What I would recommend for somebody who is a hypersensitive individual is not the same thing I would ever recommend for somebody who's not sick at all and maybe is just considering, oh, I think I might want to have a baby in the next 2 years and I just want to make sure my potential home is healthy. Totally two different things here. So that's what I created. That is probably my biggest pride of, that I made that. It took me over a year to really think about how I can make this easy for people to understand, right? And then I made multiple guides. There's 9 guides within Home Check Complete. And it was built, there's a whole playbook for people who are potentially buying a home, because I think that's part of the other process is that, we naturally, what do we do when we think about buying a home? We go get a realtor, right? And I love realtors. I truly do. But realistically, they do a lot of things that are outside of the scope of their responsibility, just because, again, nobody is teaching people what they potentially need to do know when they're getting ready to buy a home. Like, you shouldn't be depending on your realtor to provide you with inspector references. That is a conflict of interest. The realtor has a financially vested interest in your home purchase. So they can't be honestly providing you with the inspector referral because, I'm not saying that anybody is nefarious. But let's be realistic here. We need to think ethically and just it's a conflict of interest. It just is. Whenever somebody has a financially vested interest in your decisions, that is a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
They cannot be advising you on decisions or providing you with referrals at that point. So it's up to you as a home buyer to understand what an inspector can and can't do, what they're going to be looking for, how to vet one, what other inspectors might you potentially need, what should you be doing? Like you as a potential buyer, before you even get to that point where you're making an offer, there are certain things that you yourself need to be looking for in a home. So we created it's called a 20-minute home scan, and we teach you how to go into a home in that limited window of time, because we know you're in a time crunch.
You're just walking through.
That's the biggest weakness when you're buying a home, is that you lack time. Once you get down to it, you're not going to have time to, oh, wait, you just signed, paperwork to get into contract. That is not when you should start looking for your inspector. Like, you should already have, your inspector vetted and on speed dial and be like, Larry, we're ready to go, buddy.
Yeah.
So we teach you how to do that, everything you need to do in what part of the timeline and how to do it, from phone scripts to, instructions. We have blueprints. Like I said, there's 9 guides. It took me multiple years to create this. And it's an amazing resource. We even have down to contingencies. We have contingency contract templates. If you're going to do ERMI, things can get hairy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because a lot of potential sellers, they don't understand what an ERMI is. And if you come back to the table and say, hey, I want to bail out because I did a personal ERMI test and it's showing mold. They're like, wait, what? My home doesn't have mold. Yeah. You need to prove to me that, show me what you're looking at. And it turns into like a big mess. So you want to make sure that you're protected, and that, you're protecting your money. That's your investment, your deposit, your earnest money is really important. So I've tried to take my time to think of everything that people could potentially need. I've walked people through it, and so that is pretty much my pride and joy. That just dropped in November. So I'll send you some info, and cool. I think I have did I make a discount code for you? If not yet. I will make a discount code for you. It doesn't work if it's already on sale, but if it is on, if it's not on sale, it will work. And I'll give you one for ERMI interpretations and ERMIs too.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, PJ. Thank you. That was one of the things I remember seeing in your creation process. I just sat back. Wow, yay. Didn't wait. I have one more question from our guest. I think you actually just posted some content recently, or maybe I saw it was on your story as a conversation this week, but they said shower grout, how to clean, seal, when to worry. I think you just recently had this conversation, I think, on your stories. Yeah, so grout is tricky. One of the most important things to remember is that grout is porous, and your grout and your tile is primarily decorative. Yeah. It is not what is protecting your shower by any means. No. Underneath of that is an underlay. And, we put that under there because we know that there's potentially going to be water that goes through that over time. And we want to make sure that it's protected and that it's going down the drain. So, but sometimes grout gets yucky, it gets moldy, even your caulk can get yucky too. With caulk, usually if it's not getting clean with just using dish soap and water, if it's not coming off, you usually need to pull the caulk out, let it dry. And when I mean dry, I mean don't use the shower for 48 hours. Right. And then you can come back
and recaulk it. Make sure it's clean first, recaulk it, and then just take a little bit of dish soap on your finger with like a little microfiber cloth or rag and kind of smooth it out. And the dish soap will make it so it doesn't stick to your, your glove. And you can do that. With cleaning grout, there's a couple different products, but you can try, dish soap and water first. You can even try, I like the Branch Basics Oxy Boost for if you are in a jam and maybe you can't afford to purchase Branch Basic products or something. They are at a higher price point. You can use any type of like OxyClean at the grocery store or Walmart. You can even go on Amazon and you can get some of the ingredients there. But it's just easier to get them when they're pre-made. There's tons of different types of like those. There's even non-toxic ones. I think Nellie's has ones. Molly's has one. There's a ton of those like whitener. But you can just use that and kind of sprinkle it on there and let it sit. No vinegar. You don't want to use any vinegar in the shower. Vinegar is only for like glass or like hardware.
Cool.
And so, you can let it sit and then just get a scrubber and try to scrub it out. Drains are going to require you to have some special brushes. We have those in our Amazon store. If it's really not coming out and the grout is really, really stained, there is a like a kind of more commercialized product by a company called Zep, and it's their acidic grout cleaner. Please, it is toxic. Okay, so this is not a non-toxic product, and it is acidic. So it will burn your hands. You must wear
gloves.
You got to wear a mask. You got to wear PPE. You need ventilation in the room. Get your kids. Don't let your kids play while you're cleaning. Get them out of the bathroom. I would even kind of like maybe open a window if you can. And if you're cleaning with that, and just test it on an area first. And follow the directions on the back. I've used that product before as well for grout. But as far as sealing grout can get, it's a lot of maintenance. It needs to be sealed over and over and over again. I don't have my grout sealed. In fact, I just squeegee every time I take a shower. And it prevents me from I don't really have to deeply clean my grout because I have gotten into this habit where I do it every single time. But you kind of have to start from like a clean base. Once you've already got growth there, it's already kind of rooted in and is going to grow back easier. If you do see pink discoloration, even, some yellowish, peachy kind of, that can be more bacteria called Serratia marcescens. So after you clean, you do want to disinfect if you see any type of discoloration. But remember, we're doing layers. Clean first. You want to start with dish soap. Try to get the bulk off. Then you can come in with whatever type of stain remover you're going to use, whether you try the Oxy type stuff or we can try that Zep product. If you used either one, you want to rinse before you add any other chemicals to this, okay? Because those are, especially the Zep is a strong acidic type of chemical. After that, rinse really well, and then you can come in with like Force of Nature, and spritz generously and let it sit. It needs to sit before you use it.
I've had that conversation because I've learned it from you, because I will just plug you guys. PJ's cleaning highlights are like my favorite place to live. It's a simple joy on Instagram. I go watch PJ's cleaning videos, but I say that because people were dumbfounded when using a disinfectant and they wiped it off. I was like, no, friends, you gotta let it work. You gotta let it work. So you spray and let it sit.
Yep. There's what's called a dwell time, and this is also another one of those big misunderstandings when we think about products. Like even somebody was asking me the other day, like they were like, oh well, I'm using this laundry additive to put in my laundry because it's gonna kill mold. And I'm like, okay, first of all,
Okay.
let's back up and talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any product that kills mold, even if it's non-toxic, okay, it has a dwell time, meaning it's not instant. It doesn't,
Right.
nothing instantly kills bacteria, nothing instantly kills mold. Usually it's 10, 15, 20 minutes or more, and it needs to be fully saturated. So that means that the bacteria or microbe needs to be fully immersed in this product. This is where when they do those studies in those labs, right, they're not diluting it. They're literally submerging microbes in the product,
Yeah.
completely surrounded. Not even like a spritz. It's like
No, it's
completely
soaked.
surrounded. So when you think about that, and like we're using this laundry example, what happens when you put product in the washer, right? It fills with water. So that product is immediately diluted. So any properties that maybe it once had by itself, at full level, is not going to work.
Yep.
Because it just isn't going to work. This is why some of those types of killing products don't work for laundry. And even when we're trying to use them, even like bleach, for instance,
Right.
we'll use this. There's actually studies on this. Bleach can work as a disinfectant. We know this, although it's not something I would ever use on
No.
mold. There are some situations where it's used for bacteria, but if, like a toilet, isn't clean and somebody puts bleach peroxide directly on it, it takes away from the efficacy of the actual killing or the as it's breaking down the microbe. It won't work anymore because that dirt, that urine, that feces is now inhibiting that from being able to work. So this is why everything needs to be done in layers. Even when you see me do like my cleaning videos with the toilet cleaning, I'm cleaning it multiple layers.
Yep.
Before and the very last step is the disinfectant that I spritz, and I leave it. If it's too wet, I'll come in with a dry, clean, brand new microfiber, and after 20-30 minutes I'll kind of clean up the excess. But yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. I'm super thankful for all I've learned from you, Paige. So where can our community connect with you? Is it your website? Is it Instagram? Where can we get all of your guides?
Yeah, Instagram is where I am most active in my stories and even just reels and things like that. In my bio is my Stan store, where you can find links to everything, links to work with us, all of our guides. We have our home check guides, our HVAC guides, links to do consults, drop-ins, ERMI, if you want to purchase an ERMI with an interpretation. All of that stuff is there for you. And we have our website too, but those are the main places you can find us.
Awesome. Well, I have our closing question, and I think it's super sweet just to look back on where we had this conversation last time to where we are now. So if you could share any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
Wow. To my younger self. I guess to the community, because I can't think of what I would say to my younger self. Because I try not to ever live in a state of regret, but
Yeah.
But to the community, I would say, be easy on yourselves, and also get offline.
Yeah.
And try to, put the phone down and, get back to some 90s and 80s style living a little bit. And even I say this to myself, even because I'm on the computer and the phone too much.
Same.
And I think that it's just so important for us to be spending time in real life, even when you go to a concert or you go somewhere. I think that we should start having things where like sometimes I want to have like a no phone dinner or
Yep.
like a no phone party or
Yeah.
no phone get together because, you know, I just feel like everybody's always on it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when you turn around and I get it, it's habitual and it's hard, especially if you're younger and you grew up with a phone
With
in
it.
your hand. But I think that, you know, we really need to understand perspective, and it's hard to get that online. You kind of have to
Mm-hmm.
like learn that skill in real life. So I think that just spending more time with one another and just being together, that's what it's really all about in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. We promised our son after we pick him up from school that, it's 30 degrees outside, but his favorite thing is football outside the fence, mama. Outside the back fence because our backyard is bite-sized at this duty station. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to bundle up and go play football out the fence, mama.
That's awesome.
So,
That's
PJ,
awesome.
we are so blessed by your wisdom and your knowledge, and I'm just so thankful for you and our friendship. And I can't wait to share this episode with everyone.
Thank you. It was so fun.
Yeah, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening, friend. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps our community grow, and I'd be so grateful for your support. Looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle? Check out my Return to Rest ebook for simple healing habits. And if you're craving a more intentional community, join Restore, the healing collective for the weary woman, a space where we dive into rest with a lens of faith and regular accountability. For more wellness inspiration, follow along at Instagram at WiselyWell or visit livingwiselywell.com for everything from podcast episodes to budget-friendly tips. Thanks again for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next episode.